Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at how an estimated 19 lakh people's lives are in a sort of bureaucratic limbo a year after the National Register of Citizens was released in Assam. Then, we're looking at India recording its biggest economic contraction since it started reporting quarterly economic growth figures. But first, we're looking at the spike in COVID-19 cases being witnessed across the country and what we know about the possibility of people who have recovered getting reinfected by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. India has seen its daily number of COVID-19 cases rise steadily, and since last week has been registering over 75,000 cases across the country daily. While this is the highest number of cases detected in 24 hours anywhere in the world, how do we read these statistics? We're now joined by Amitabh Sinha, who is the Indian Express's resident editor in Pune and has been tracking the COVID-19 statistics since the start of the pandemic. So, Amitabh, India's caseload of COVID-19 has seen a new daily peak of around 75,000 cases now in a 24-hour period, and this has been happening over multiple days. But this comes even as another metric. The positivity rate in the nation is falling. Could you explain how to read these two numbers together?
Right. So positivity rate, as you know, is the percentage of people testing positive out of the total number of people who are tested. So if there are 100 people who are getting tested and 10 of them turn out to be positive, you have a positivity rate of 10%. So that is how we define the positivity rate. Now, what is happening is that this positivity rate is showing a declining trend for the last 3 weeks or so. What that means is that for the same number of tests, your positivity rate is going down. So if you were doing 100 tests earlier and you were finding 10 people positive, now for the same 100 tests, probably you are finding only 8 persons positive. It would indicate that the transmission of the disease is not happening at the rate at which it was happening some time ago, right? That's why your positivity rate would show a decline, that the spread of the disease is not happening as fast as was happening a few years earlier.
Amitabh says that the positivity rate declining is a good trend, even though it comes as there has been a rise in the number of cases. On Monday, India recorded over 78,000 fresh cases of COVID-19 in a 24-hour period. Amitabh says that this fall in positivity comes even as India has substantially ramped up its testing to almost 1 million tests a day.
The only logical connection that is usually made is that this is happening because your actual number of tests are rising. I'll try to explain it. If your positivity rate is going from, say, 10% to 8%, and you are still finding higher numbers, that would be possible only when your tests have gone up. So instead of 100 tests, if you start doing 200 tests and the positivity rate remains at, say, 8%, then instead of finding 10 people earlier, you are now finding 16 people, right? So that was the correlation that was being drawn, and that's what even the government has been trying to say. Look, situation is not that bad. The numbers have gone up surely, but the numbers have gone up because we have increased the tests. In short, what they want to say is, look, yes, there has been an increase in the number of cases going up, but that's not because the disease is spreading in many more people. That's just because we have been testing many more people than we were doing earlier.
The daily death rate in the country continues to rise, and the number of deaths that has risen in, say, states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra still remains the worst affected. So what would be the concerns now, given that we are only unlocking further in the days ahead?
Yes. So now the deaths, actually, there is no very direct correlation between deaths and the number of cases. Of course, higher number of cases would yield higher deaths probably. But apart from that, there is no very direct connection that if you have an increasing number of cases for a short period of time, you would also see an increase in the number of deaths. It may or may not happen over short periods of time. Now, India, as we speak, going by yesterday's figures, India now has the third highest death count in the world. So Mexico was third earlier. Yesterday, we overtook Mexico. Now only the United States and Brazil have more numbers than India. Now, while we have a very high number of deaths, actual number of deaths, which is around 65,000 now, if we look in terms of either if we look deaths per million population, or if we look the number of deaths out of the total number of cases that we have, then on both these metrics, India goes far below in the ranking list. There would be more than 80 or 90 countries which would have much worse figures than India has currently.
Amitabh says that considering India's population and density, the situation is not that bad. He points to India's case fatality ratio, which is the number of deaths due to the virus divided by the total number of cases. India's case fatality ratio is presently almost half of the world average, lower than nations like Brazil and the US. But that doesn't mean the number of deaths won't keep rising.
But your death count, as of now, it's going to rise in any case, because we, unlike many other countries, we have not reached the peak as yet. We are still some distance away. And as we continue to find more and more cases at record levels, I guess the number of deaths would also continue to rise for some time. Already, we are discovering about 1,000 deaths every day we are reporting. Sometimes it goes down to 800 and 900. But that's the level of deaths that we are reporting every day. And it's only likely to go up. I don't think it's going to come down very soon.
But the rise in cases comes even as reports trickle in that there are cases of reinfection being reported. That is, people who've had the virus, recovered, and then contracted the virus again. Amitabh says that the belief was that once a person contracted the virus and recovered, their immune systems would have learned how to battle the virus again if needed.
If there are reinfections happening, that would mean that the immune response that is generated by your body does not last very long. And this is not very unusual for this particular disease. There are other diseases for which immunity does not last very long, and there are cases of reinfection that keep happening. So it's not an unusual thing that is happening with this disease. The only thing why there is a certain bit of excitement right now is that the first confirmed cases of a reinfection have now been established. Right, there might have been reinfections happening earlier as well, but it never got confirmed. And the first case was confirmed in Hong Kong of a 32-year-old Chinese man. Then there were reports from Belgium and Netherlands. They haven't published a paper, so those are still like reported cases. We don't know whether they are confirmed or not. And then we found another person in the United States who has been confirmed to have been reinfected. Now, the reinfection would obviously mean that even if you have recovered from the disease, probably you have the chance of getting the disease again. And that opens up completely new possibilities, in the sense that that would mean that the end of the pandemic is nowhere in sight as of now, till you actually find probably a treatment or a vaccine, both of which are not available right now. So you get on this cycle of infection and reinfection.
But Amitabh cautions that we need to understand that the information about reinfections so far isn't enough, and it comes with a lot of conditions.
We do not know, for example, that everyone is susceptible to a reinfection or not. Now, that is an open question. We do not know as of now. We do not know how many people are likely to be reinfected. We do not know how long does it take for a person to become susceptible to reinfection. We do not know whether the second reinfection, when it happens, would be stronger than the first, or would it be weaker than the first. Like in the case of the Chinese man in Hong Kong, for example, the first infection was a mild, the second infection was asymptomatic, meaning the second one was even weaker than the first one. So we really don't know. There are lots of open questions about reinfection as of now. So we don't have very proper answers for them. The only thing that has happened, and that probably is confirmed now, is that reinfection has been demonstrated to have been happening, at least in two cases, one in Hong Kong, the other one in the United States.
As Amitabh said, we risk getting on a cycle of infection and reinfection if recovered people can contract the virus again and we don't know who's at risk. But what does this mean then for the development of a vaccine against the virus? Would a vaccine really be useful in this case?
So the cases of reinfection does not have too much of an impact on the vaccines being developed for the simple reason that, even without the reinfection getting confirmed, the effectiveness of the vaccines is again something that is an open question. In the longevity of the effectiveness, we do not know as of now how long the vaccines would be effective.
A vaccine would basically teach our body's immune system how to target and fight the SARS CoV 2 virus by mimicking characteristics of the coronavirus. Theoretically, the next time a vaccinated person's body encounters the same virus, it should trigger an immune response that can fight the coronavirus successfully.
How long that immunity is going to last with the vaccines was something that the vaccine developers are not sure of. As all of us right now know, the vaccines are still being tried, right? And once they are tried, then people need to be followed for several months or several years to see how they are responding to the disease now that they have got the vaccine. As of now, all the vaccines that are being developed, we would only get to know from these trials whether they are effective or not. But how long are they going to be effective is something, again, that we do not know as of now. And it's not very unusual, again, to have vaccines which do not offer you permanent immunity against the disease. There are, of course, vaccines which protect you permanently. You take a shot and then you are assured for the rest of your life that you're not going to get that disease. But for a lot of other diseases, you have to keep repeating the doses, or there are what are called booster doses. After periodically, you have to keep taking those vaccines in order to reinforce the protection that you have got. So these vaccines for coronavirus, whether they will offer lifetime protection or whether they will offer, say, 10 years protection, or whether they will offer a protection only for 3 months, is a question that we do not know an answer to right now.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say that they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there's perhaps no other place that does this better than the Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of the newspaper, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log into indianexpress.com/explained and access their coverage 24/7. Explained by the Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show.
The National Register of Citizens, the NRC, was published in Assam last year, 31st August 2019. And its outcome was that 19 lakh people residing in Assam were excluded from it. It means that they couldn't prove, according to the NRC's yardstick, that they were residents of the state prior to March 24th, 1971, which is the cutoff date for ascertaining who is an Indian citizen in Assam.
That's Abhishek Saha, the Indian Express's correspondent in Assam. The 19 lakh citizens left out of the National Register of Citizens or NRC was out of 3.3 crore applicants who had applied to be included. A quick note about the NRC. The NRC was published in 2019 and was an update of the National Register of Citizens that was published in 1951 on the basis of the census conducted then. The final NRC in 2019 came after 2 drafts were published earlier. This 2019 NRC update that was mandated and monitored by the Supreme Court was a fallout of the Assam Accord of 1985 that set the 24th of March 1971 as the cutoff date for citizenship. Any resident of Assam who could prove that either they or their ancestors had been living in the state prior to the 1971 cutoff date would be included in the NRC. However, if you had applied and your name didn't appear in the NRC, it didn't mean you weren't a citizen.
The government of India had categorically said that if you are excluded from the NRC, it doesn't immediately mean that you are a foreigner. you can only be declared a foreigner when the state's foreigner tribunals decide that you are a foreigner and not an Indian citizen. Now, for the 19 lakh excluded people to go to the foreigners tribunal and appeal against their NRC exclusion, they need to have a rejection order from the NRC authorities, which will state that this and this are the reasons why you and your family or you and your relatives, this and that, they are out of the NRC. Now, the crucial post NRC publication thing was the issuance of this rejection order, which, as we complete a year today since the publication, that has not been issued till now.
Basically, if you're not on the NRC, you can't appeal against it in the Foreigners Tribunal unless you have the reasons for rejection.
Until and unless the rejection orders are issued to the excluded people, till then the process is not complete, because only when you give people the reason why they have been excluded, only then the NRC directorate's work is over.
And therefore, Abhishek says, people are stuck between two government processes and are in a sort of limbo.
There is no further clarity as to when the rejection orders will be issued. There is some remaining verification work. There is some discrepancies in the rejection orders which are being sorted out by the authorities. But that work too is stuck because ground level officials are in fact engaged in a wide scale pandemic related work.
Abhishek says that the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent floods in the state have kept state government officials busy with relief work, and therefore there's been no progress on delivering these rejection orders. But he also points out that large sections of society in Assam, that include the state BJP unit, state government, and the all-powerful All Assam Students Union, are not happy with the fact that only 19 lakh people have been excluded from the NRC.
According to them, the NRC suffered from wrongful exclusions and wrongful inclusions. People who shouldn't have been in have got in, and who should have been in are out. So as a result, what has happened is there is a very widespread demand of re-verification, that the included names have to be re-verified. So the government of Assam says that there has to be a 20% re-verification of included names. 20% of the included names should be re-verified in border districts of the state, while 10% of the included names should be re-verified in the remaining districts, the non-border districts.
There's also the NGO Assam Public Works that was the main petitioner before the Supreme Court in connection with the NRC.
They are seeking 100% re-verification, that all names, all included names have to be re-verified. And that matter is before the Supreme Court. And now, very interestingly, since 2013, the Supreme Court had been very proactive in leading the process, supervising the process, monitoring the process. How is it happening on the ground in Assam? But this year, the last Supreme Court hearing in the matter was held on January 6th, and we have stepped into September. So the NRC hitting a stone wall is not being helped by the fact that the Supreme Court's hearing are not taking place.
So now there are multiple groups, including the state government, who want a re-verification of the NRC. But why is the Supreme Court hearing the matter so critical to action on the ground?
You have to understand that since 2013, the Supreme Court of India has been the kind of the guiding force of the process's execution on the ground. So as a result, when the Supreme Court is not telling you what to do next, then of course there is no pressure on the executive on the ground who has to carry out the exercise. I mean, because since 2013, the Supreme Court had been really proactively saying that, yes, this is the deadline, this is the next date, this is by when you have to complete the draft. By next date, you have to complete the next draft, the second draft. So, that process was going on. But then the Chief Justice of India, the former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, who was kind of leading the bench, which was hearing the NRC matter, he also retired. And now the Supreme Court bench, which is hearing the case, has not held a new hearing after January 6th this year.
So because the Supreme Court has not given any further directions, the state government and other groups that want a re-verification of the NRC aren't keen on taking the process forward. State government employees have had their hands full with disasters like COVID-19 and the floods. As a result, Abhishek says, there are people across the state whose lives aren't thrown into chaos, but suddenly find they can't undertake certain work.
There are districts in Assam where police clearance for passport is put on hold for excluded people. They are not issuing the clearance because they say that it's a serious matter and it's not prudent to issue police clearance for passport if a person's citizenship is in doubt.
Abhishek says that all authorities have been very clear in repeating that no one loses their citizenship or rights as an Indian citizen because their names aren't on the NRC. But that doesn't make things easy for people on the ground.
It can be argued that for a vast majority of people, it hasn't had much of a life changing experience. No one was dragged to a detention center or detained for being a foreigner just because you are out of the NRC. But there are instances which have fallen through the cracks. There are people whose passport verification is awaited. There are women in villages, at least one or two case studies which I came across, where when the marriage proposals were talked about, then these issues came out, that your name is not in the NRC. What if tomorrow you are declared a foreigner and taken to a detention center or whatever happens to you? If your citizenship is questioned, then what happens to the marriage? Those kind of instances have happened. There has also been a social kind of mockery. I have also come across instances where young men have been derided by their friends or colleagues, saying that, oh, your name is not there in the NRC. You'll be taken to Bangladesh or what. So those kind of conversations have taken place. Those kind of things have happened.
Abhishek also reported how multiple groups in Assam are hoping to benefit from the Citizenship Amendment Act, whose rules are still to be specified. But how is that playing out on the ground in a state that witnessed massive protests against the law?
There was a huge opposition to the CAA in Assam, where groups representing indigenous people, they said that the CAA is number one, violative of the Assam Accord, and number two, it poses a threat to the interests, to the culture, rights, and language of the indigenous Assamese people. But at the same time, why I have reported that the CAA is giving some ray of hope to some sections of people, because there are Bengali Hindus in Assam who fall under the ambit of the CAA. The excluded Muslim people will not be the beneficiary of the CAA.
Curiously enough, this state of inaction has also resulted in 1,600 people appointed by the state government finding their jobs in limbo. Abhishek explains why.
There were already 100 foreigners tribunal in the state. Now, when the NRC was coming out, then it was decided by the center that we will give 200 more foreigner tribunals. So 200 more foreigner tribunal would take the total number of tribunals to 300. And the plan was that these 300 foreigners tribunals will deal with the new load of foreigner cases when the NRC excluded people will appeal in these tribunals. But those 200 tribunals, they have also hit a stone wall because they don't have the NRC excluded people appealing to them. So there is also a small developing story that there were 1,600 staff members who were selected by the government to work as staff members of these new 200 foreigners tribunal. So these 600 newly recruited people, they are also like waiting. It's a long wait for them because they don't know when, and their appointment has not taken place because the new 200 foreigners tribunal do not have any work.
Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been various estimates about how badly economic growth in India has been affected by the lockdowns and the spread of the virus. On Monday, India got its first official estimate, and it was grim. The GDP for the April to June quarter 2020 showed that India's economy had contracted by 23.9% in a period that saw national and more local lockdowns to curb the spread of the virus. This is the sharpest contraction since quarterly GDP figures started getting released in 1996 and was way worse than what analysts estimated. The only major economy that has shown a comparable contraction is the US, which saw a 32.9% contraction in the same quarter. As per figures released by the government, financial services sank 5.3%, while trade, hotels, transport, and communication declined 47%. Manufacturing shrank 39.3%, construction contracted 50.3%, mining output fell 23.3%, and the electricity and gas segment dropped 7%. The only sector that showed growth is the agriculture sector, which saw 3.4% growth in the quarter. The nation's chief economic advisor said that the GDP figure was along expected lines and told news agency PTI that India is experiencing a V-shaped recovery after the unlock was announced. However, experts and analysts in private firms predicted that the contraction in GDP would continue for the next quarter as well, but it may not be as severe as the first quarter. The nation's central bank in its annual report was also not very optimistic about economic growth this year. We discussed what that report said in a previous episode, and the link is provided in the description of today's episode. You were listening to The Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Arun George, and as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.